So let's discuss the flows in our CorDapp. So we looked at an example like this a little bit earlier. We see here that there are two nodes that are communicating. We said in an earlier section that the flows are, they describe those sequence of actions that the nodes need to perform when processing a transaction. So we can see here node A, node B. These are the two user nodes, and then we have our notary pool. Node A makes a proposed update for the ledger and then runs a check. Then for the check here, we see they both run checks. There is a sign and update, and the check here is sent. And then we can see here it's sent to node B. Node B executes its check and update and signs the update and then sends it back to node A. Okay, great. And now just to validate that there are no double spends and other rules, the notary will sign the transaction. And then, so we have these three signatures now from node A, node B, and from the notary. The notary sends back the transaction for recording on the ledger back up to node A, and node A then sends the signatures and the updates for recording back to node B, and then we would see that entry into the Corda ledger. So this is just one example of a flow. We can see here that flow logic actually comes from the needs of the business. So again, the business and the developers can put together those sequence of steps as needed. Flows don't always have to update the ledger. They can also run network operations. They can make HTTP calls. So it's really up to the needs of the business and how the developer implements. So again, we can see here flow logic. There is an API for flow logic and an API for a transaction builder. So let's take a look at a brief demo. So let's take a look at our flow classes. Here we have under our flow package, we have our issue flow. And again, I encourage you to go through these and read these comments. They are really informative. But we can see here that we have our issue flow, and we can see here the result will be a signed transaction, or the intended result is a signed transaction. So we see we get a reference to the notary and the key pair. Create that issue command. We can see the command issue here. Build the transaction, and again, we will take a look at this in a little more abstracted detail on a slide. We can see here we verify and sign with our key pair. And let's take a look at the settle flow, and you can certainly read through all of these. For the step one here, again, the idea is a signed transaction, so we retrieve the IOU state from the vault, the current state. We check the party running the flow is the borrower, so we're validating identities there, that our identity is not the borrower. Again, we build our transaction and involve the notary. We check we have enough cash to settle the requested amount and the cash balance. So we check that cash balance amount. We do an if it's greater than the amount. And let's take a look at our transfer flow here. Again, the result is returning a signed transaction. So we can see here that we retrieve the IOU again. The IOU specified linear ID from the vault. The flow can be initiated by the current recipient. So we can see here the lender. Check the new IOU state reflecting a new lender. And create a transfer command again. And then if you look here a little bit lower here, we're involving the notary again with the builder. So please go through these. Again, these are very well commented. And again, you don't have to be an expert coder to really understand what's going on here. But it's good to see all of these classes and how they will actually run. I'm going to come back here to the IOU issue flow. What we're going to do here is in our next slide, we're actually going to review the steps of the flow, the sequence of actions in detail. So we'll see how we get our reference to the notary. We'll see our code as far as calling the transaction builder and creating the state. So we'll go through all of these steps here, and then ultimately the signing the transaction. We'll just take a look at the logic that's involved here. So as promised, again, if you get a chance, please take a look back at the class we just looked at, IOU issue flow. But if you remember, in the sequence, we chose a notary for the transaction, and then in our code, we created a transaction builder, created the IOU state, you created an issue command. So take a look at all of that. And so this was what was really custom for our transaction. And then again, we verified the transaction, signed the transaction, and notarized and recorded the transaction. And if we remember that from this last step here, if we remember that from our flow diagram. So again, back to our flow diagram for 1 second. Here's our notary pool. We are notarizing and then recording the transaction. So for your assignment, please take a look at each of these classes, the tests, and the actual source code in the contract. Again, these repositories are in the Template Master, Corda Training Template Master, and Corda Training Solutions Master. There'll be instructions on how to run them and also a demonstration on how to run them. And finally, a summary of our flows discussion. Flows automate the process of updating the ledger. Flows are classes implementing the flow logic interface and the steps needed to complete a transaction. Flow logic classes should override or call, which defines the flow steps, and transaction builders are used to construct the transactions.